So welcome to The Church Begins, these shorter messages from the book of Acts. And today we will look into Acts chapter 11. And when I was preparing myself for this shorter devotional on Acts 11, I start to see things that I have not seen before, and I was a little bit touched by it. And I think you are with me with this if you read the Bible on a regular basis, that this is really a living book. The Bible speaks to us different ways depending on what kind of state we are in. And I thought that maybe I should do a sermon on just chapter 11. So I have been preparing that actually, but I do not know when that will be happening. But today, a shorter devotional on Acts 11. Acts chapter 11 is a chapter of turning points, not just for the early church, but for every believer who has ever struggled to see the surprising, boundary-breaking work of God. It invites us into a moment when the Holy Spirit's moved beyond expectations, beyond tradition, and beyond comfort zones. And the people of God, they had to decide whether they could and would resist or rejoice. So let us walk through the chapter slowly and draw out its devotional weight. When Peter he returns to Jerusalem after his encounter with Cornelius, the believers there, they don't celebrate, they criticize him. They say in verse 3, "You went to uncircumcised men and you ate with them." And before Peter can even speak, their assumptions write the story for him. This is often the dynamic in our hearts as well, I would like to say. God does something new, surprising, or even uncomfortable, and we question it before we worship. And Peter who responds not with defensiveness, but with the testimony. He simply tells the story of how God moved, step by step, sign by sign. And his conclusion is very piercing. Who was I to think that I could stand in God's way? Persecution scattered the early Christians, we know that. But instead of silencing the gospel, it actually multiplied it. And some believers, they traveled to Antioch and began preaching not only to the Jews, but also to the Greeks. And this wasn't a committee-approved initiative. It was not a strategic plan. It was not an official mission. It was faithful people carrying Jesus wherever life's disruption pushed them. And then comes one of the most beautiful lines in the whole book of Acts. The Lord's hand was with them, and a great number of people believed, and they turned to the Lord. Often the greatest work of God emerged from seasons that feels like a loss. The scattering felt like a setback, but God was actually sowing seeds. Questions we can ask ourselves: where has life scattered us? Is it relationally, geographically, emotionally? But could that be a place where God is planting something new and through us? When news of God's movement in Antioch reached Jerusalem, they sent Barnabas. Barnabas, whose name means son of encouragement. He arrives, sees the grace of God, and he rejoices. He doesn't critique. He doesn't tighten a control. He doesn't say, this isn't how we do things in Jerusalem. No, instead, he encouraged them all to remain true to the Lord with all their hearts. In a world full of critics, Barnabas, he chooses celebration. In a world full of suspicion, he chooses encouragement. The result? Well, a great number of people were brought to the Lord. Encouragement is not a small ministry. No, it opens doors for the Spirit to work. But we need to be careful of whom we let in as our closest friends, of who we let in as leader in our church. Absolutely. But we need sometimes to find these people, to speak into our lives with encouragement. And also we can ask our questions. How might God use our words to strengthen someone else's calling? And do we speak these words of strength into someone else's life? Barnabas realizes something crucial. Antioch needs more than enthusiasm. It needs teaching. So he goes to find Saul and he brings him back. And for a whole year, they teach together. And this is the time when all the believers, they are called Christians. This wasn't a self-given title. It was the observation of the world. These people, they looked like Jesus. And that identity has forged not in solo spirituality, but in shared life, shared instruction, but also shared growth. A prophecy brings news of a coming famine. The believers in Antioch respond not with fear, but with generosity. Each gives according to their ability. There's no pressure, no comparison, just Spirit-led compassion. And they send help to all the believers they even never met in a region most have never visited. So the gospel not only crossed ethnic boundaries, it crossed economic boundaries as well. So what is the takeaway on Acts chapter 11? Well, it calls us to see. It calls us to celebrate and join in God's surprising work. And I think Acts 11 challenges us, like so many other parts of our Bibles, perhaps here in 5 ways. Don't resist what God is doing because it is unfamiliar. Trust that your scattered places can become sacred spaces. Encourage others because your voice may be part of God's plan. Pursue community that forms a so-called Christ-likeness. And the last one, express the gospel through generous actions. I think chapter 11 is a reminder that the Spirit is always ahead of us, always, in a way, inviting us to catch up with His unbelievable grace.